everybody. Thank you, Pete. Very kind words. I really appreciate it. I feel very much the same way about you. It's been amazing working with you over the last six years. I was going to say that I feel a little underdressed after following these guys. I'm not sure if I'll be able to fix it, but we'll go with what I have on. My name is Igor Minar. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I'm a tech lead on the Angular project. And I feel so honored to be able to come here 4th year in a row. AngularConnect is a very special event, and when Ed, Josh, and Pete came to us and pitched the idea of an event where people would come to connect, we found it very fascinating because community and community building events is very important to the Angular community, and anybody who's trying to support this is welcome, and we like those kinds of events. When I come here, I truly feel that I can connect. I connect with many developers here, with speakers. I have lots of conversations about Angular. I get feedback about what works, what doesn't. I hear about ideas where people are trying to new things, and I get inspired. When I talk to many new people, I get asked questions about Angular at Google. And more recently, as we are welcoming more and more new people to the Angular community, I get asked questions about what Angular looked like, or what were the first days of Angular at Google long time ago. Well, let me tell you a little story. I joined Google in the summer of 2010. I got this little Angular hat, which everybody at Google gets. And I joined specifically to work on Angular because I found it very interesting in its ability to build user interfaces very quickly, and through that, be able to create much better user interfaces than what we were able to build in the past. Well, when it comes to Angular at Google, it's really, we need to be talking about AngularJS at Google. And in fact, at the time when I joined, this logo didn't even exist. The project was in very infancy. And originally, it was a project that was designed for non-developers. It wasn't a development framework the way we know it today. It was really a tool for non-developers to use declarative programming approach using HTML and CSS to build simple applications, form-based, with a simple database backend, and allow this kind of non-developers build this kind of user interfaces. However, as we were working on this tool, we realized that we were struggling. We were having a hard time making the system easy enough for non-developers to approach it. But one of the feedback we got from our fellow engineers and developers was, this thing is amazing. You know, if you allowed us to actually write JavaScript instead of just HTML and CSS, this could be very powerful. So we pivoted and changed the tool from targeting non-developers to targeting developers. By focusing on declarative programming, on reducing the boilerplate, making testability built in and very easy, we were able to build a framework that people liked. As these projects go at Google, if you get to a certain point in maturity, we often go through engineering reviews. And the first engineering review for AngularJS was in November of 2010. This is when we gathered. It was Brad, Mishko, and me, the 3 people that worked on Angular at the time. And we went to present to the most senior vice presidents at Google, and we tried to pitch a project and get more support. As we did that, our claim was simple. We claimed that with AngularJS, we could make all of the Google developers much more productive because they would be writing 10 times less code. Remember, this was the time when most of the user interfaces were built using technologies like Git or GWT or JavaScript, which were very verbose and error-prone. You had to do a lot of imperative programming. When these VPs looked at that pitch, they were very skeptical. And the one that was the most skeptical was Urs Halsley, who is currently the senior vice president for the technical infrastructure. And he outright called us liars. He basically said, you know, if your solution is half as good as you're claiming, developers will be dying to use it. If you really want to prove that this works and can scale, you have to go out and start building applications. Well, we didn't get discouraged. we went out and started approaching teams. And Urs and his dismissal, friendly dismissal, gave us more ammunition. We started approaching projects and pitching Angular to them. Through trainings, working sessions, and interactions with various teams at Google, we started acquiring customers. And through interactions with these customers, we received feedback on what worked, what didn't, how we could improve AngularJS, and that's how AngularJS became the AngularJS you know today. From AngularJS, we later learned more things. We needed to adjust the framework to the ever-changing environment, the web ecosystem, the standards, and that's how we built Angular. If we fast forward to 2018, now we have a very different solution, but it's a solution that is used by most Google engineers at Google, by far. This doesn't even include AngularJS. Products like Firebase Console, Google Analytics, Google Express, Cloud Console are just among just a handful of 600 or more applications that are built with Angular today. And it's really not just Angular being used at Google. Angular is these days used all over the place. One of the interesting things, one of the interesting ideas of how we got to know how people use Angular is through developer surveys. Stack Overflow did a very interesting developer survey over the summer where they surveyed over 100,000 developers, and Angular came on the top of one of the most frequently used solutions, and this included also backend solutions. Another data point we got from Stack Overflow and from the analytics of the people visiting the site and looking at different answers was who these people are that are coming to learn about Angular. And what we learned is that most of them come from enterprises, either from retail, financial, insurance, or energy or healthcare industries. This didn't surprise us, because Angular was really built for these kinds of applications, for big enterprise applications where we have lots of developers working and collaborating on this application. What did make us really excited was when we learned that Crunchbase did an analytics on their data. Crunchbase is an analytics company that monitors startups and bigger companies, looks at investments and the technologies that these companies use. And based on their data, Angular is one of the most popular solutions that seed and early stage startups use these days. This data also confirms what we see on our Angular.io website. Angular.io is the main site where developers come to learn about Angular, where we publish documentation, and what we see is a constant growth. Just over the first 6 months of this year, the visitors number grew by 40% compared to last year. As we grow, it's very important for us to remember who we are and involve more of you to help us grow in the way we want to grow. And this is why we often talk about the values that Angular and the Angular community has. When we talk about these things, we talk about applications that users love to use, applications that developers love to build, and community where everybody feels welcome. These are not just words. We picked these 3 things for a reason. The first one refers to the user experience we are aspiring to build. We really want good user interfaces that people all around the world interact with, because this makes these people more productive and able to contribute back and be happier. In order to achieve building these kind of applications, we need to make it easier for developers to iterate and be able to produce this kind of UIs. And this is about the second point. The second point is focus on developer experience. And the last one is really about diversity. In order for us to be able to build good teams, build good applications, we need to be able to understand each other better. We need to be able to understand our users. And the way we can do that is by building a community of developers with all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different experiences, because then these experiences transfer to how we build applications, how we build these user interfaces. Once we are able to give opportunities to many people to join our community, we will see that we are able to build applications that are much better than applications built by group of people that are the same. There are many different ways how we can make a community more diverse. One of the efforts is NG Girls. NG Girls is an effort started by Shmula Jacobs that is now a global phenomenon. They run workshops for women around the world where they create a very supportive environment for women to come and learn basics of Angular. I myself mentored one of these workshops, and I found it a fascinating experience, and I highly recommend it to everybody. As developers, we often forget about things that we take for granted because we have lots of experience with dealing with different errors, different issues. We just know to find our way, and we already have a way of thinking about things. However, if you start interacting with a developer that doesn't have this experience, you will see things through the eyes of this developer. And this is how I saw Angular. When I had to explain some of the concepts that to me were very simple, but the developers I was mentoring just didn't understand what I was trying to explain. This is great feedback for us because it allows us to think more about the APIs we are building, the abstractions, and making them more friendly for all of the developers. If you are not able to mentor one of these events, there are other ways how you can help, either through corporate sponsoring or through individual sponsorships. I'm sure the NG Girls and other events like this will welcome any kind of contributions you can make. NG Girls is just one way of making a community more welcoming, more diverse, more inclusive. There are other ways to do that. But in general, what we are trying to do is create excellent interactions in our community. Often, and even today, we started this conference talking about the code of conduct. Code of conduct is just a set of rules, and people think, this is all we need to do to be great. And I'm sorry to disappoint you that this is actually the lowest amount of effort we need to extend to make things better for everybody. Because most of the time, when you come to events like these, good things happen. If you look at the distributions of the quality of interactions, about 80% of the interactions are good or okay. And then there you have a tail on both ends where some interactions are bad, some interactions are excellent. Unfortunately, the code of conduct really talks about how to prevent some of the worst interactions. What we should be striving for as a community is shift the whole distribution and strive to make most of the interactions excellent. How can we do this? Well, there are several ways. If you see something bad, speak out. Speak out immediately or talk to the right people. If you are at an event like this, talk to the organizers. If you see something in the community, you can approach us. If you go to the code of conduct, there is a contact information and instructions on how to approach us. And we happen to get involved in many situations like this in the past. These things are very important for us, and we will get involved. However, when good things happen, we also want to know. And you should tell everybody, because this inspires people, this makes people aware that there are good things happening. So often these days, when we read news or just look through our Twitter feed, there is a lot of negativity. And people often don't talk about the good things that happen. So I encourage you to go out, and whenever you have a really great interactions, tell everybody around you about it, because it helps to make everybody think about these things and create better interactions. One of the ways to create good communities and interactions is through meetups. Currently, there is around 802 meetups that are focused on Angular all around the world. Recently, we worked with Eric Bouchard on a guest post on how to build meetups that are successful. Eric shared his story, shared many tips, and one of the things that stood out to us was the benefits he personally took out that many of you could also take out. Eric talked about how he learned new concepts and was able to keep up with ever-changing ecosystem. He was able to build new friendships and networks. He gained a company-wide visibility thanks to his organizational responsibilities. And lastly, he was able to build his own personal confidence and personal growth by working on his presentation skills and working with other people. If this is something that you are interested in, I highly encourage you to look if there is a meetup in your area. If there isn't, start one. If there is one, approach one of the organizers, because organizers are often looking for help. But let's talk about Angular. Back in 2016, I was back in Europe, in Belgium. And then at NGBE, I announced how we're going to evolve Angular in the future. Back then, I talked about how we were going to adopt semantic versioning for Angular, and how we're going to adopt time-based releases. I made a promise that we would release 2 major releases every year, and make these releases a non-event when it comes to upgrade pain. So over the last 2 years, we actually already released 4 major releases, if we don't include version 2.0. And we set the stage for this strategy of predictable and continuous improvements within the framework and within the platform. One of the things that we heard from developers is that they like this predictability. They know when the upgrades are coming, and they can plan for them. They also highlighted that the upgrades are really not an issue. Most of the developers and Google developer experts that we work closely with before the release to verify that things are working well report that it takes very little time to upgrade from one major version to the next. And for the customers and users that cannot update as rapidly as we release major versions, we added long-term support. So for every major version, once it's released, you will have at least 18 months of support when it comes to critical fixes and security fixes. This year alone, we released 2 versions. We released Angular 6 and Angular 7. When the theme for these was bringing things together and making things easier to update. In the past, Angular, when we talked about Angular as the framework. As of version 6, we brought under this umbrella the tooling, primarily through Angular CLI, and Angular Material and the component development kit. Many of you use these things in your projects, and you find it difficult to keep track of different release schedules for these projects. So as of version 6, we combine the release schedules for all 3 of these major projects, and you get to update to them together. We test them together, we know that they all work, and everything is much simpler for everybody. With these releases, we also made it easier to update through a new command in CLI called ngupdate. ngupdate automates the process of updating. You can just issue a command to update the CLI in your project, the framework, or if you're using Angular Material, also the material. This doesn't just update the package, the JSON, and update the version of the package you're using, but it also executes any kind of code transformations and refactorings that will help to update your project. So for example, if we deprecate an API and provide a new API that is better, we can automatically refactor your project to the new API. This is what we've done when we updated to RxJS 6, because this infrastructure actually works for any kind of third-party packages as long as they provide the right metadata. With RxJS 6, we were able to update all of the imports, and many of the operators were renamed, and we were able to do that automatically for you. Our goal is to create a fully supported and fully integrated ecosystem where tools just work together, and you don't need to worry about it, because as a developer, we want to make it our responsibility to make sure that these things work, and your responsibility to build the best possible user experience and user interfaces. We're not fully there yet, but this is the goal we're working towards. One of the good examples of this is CLI. In CLI, and in general, we're not trying to just make a one integrated monolithic system. We're trying to provide default options, but also make it extensible for third parties and other companies to provide other options. CLI provides several core commands, like new to generate new project, generate to add new components, pipes, and services to the application, and update I already mentioned. All of these work with third-party extensions where you can customize them to the needs of your application or your company. The last command that we added this year was ng-add. And ng-add brings this extensibility and takes it to the new level. With ng-add, you can take an existing project and add new functionality to it. A good example of this is material. In the past, it was quite difficult to bring material to your application because you need to set up style sheets and do other things. With ng-add, we do all of this work for you. You don't need to worry about it. Similarly, if you want to use elements, in some cases you need the right polyfills. You would have to study the documentation. With ng-add, we can add these polyfills to your application in the right way as soon as you make the choice to use elements. And a good example is also progressive web applications. If you want your application to be progressive web application, it just takes a single command, will generate all the manifests, so we set up the build system and set up the service worker for your application without you having to do very much. Again, this ecosystem doesn't only work for the first-party extensions, but also for any kind of third-party extensions. And we already have extensions in the form of ng Bootstrap, Clarity, and NativeScript. NativeScript is quite interesting because you can take a single command and turn your web application into an application that is capable of producing web application as well as native iOS and Android applications. By default, you just have ng-serve. As soon as you run the commands, you get additional commands that now allow you to build these native applications. And it took very little. With NativeScript, you can share most of the code, and things just work very seamlessly. As we add more of these commands and the CLI gives you more options, it's important to understand what these options are. And this is why we put a lot of effort into bringing the CLI documentation into the Angular site and make it an integral part of the documentation. All of the commands are now documented, and you can find them there. But what's better than going to find documentation about some CLI tool is a tool that gives you user interface for the CLI. And this is what Angular Console is. Angular Console was built by our friends from Narwhal. They launched the beta version of this over the summer. And with Angular Console, you have a user interface for the CLI. It's the same CLI that we built, but with a user face on top of it. It allows you to just do a single install and get all of the dependencies. For example, if you're a starting developer that doesn't know how to set up Node or how to install Angular CLI, Angular Console comes pre-packaged with all of these dependencies and will make it possible for you to get started very quickly. And lastly, if you get lost in all of the flags and all of the options you have in the CLI, the console allows you to navigate and visually learn about all the possibilities and build your project in the way you would like. However, sometimes you don't even want to install things on your computer. You just want to go in the browser and start hacking. And this is a good use case for StackBlitz. StackBlitz is a PWA, Progressive Web Applications, that includes an editor that is the same editor that you are familiar with from VS Code. We worked with the guys from StackBlitz and added Angular integration. StackBlitz, by default, now generates a project that looks just like the CLI project that you built on your desktop. You can use the same generate commands to add more components, add more services. We added language support, language service support, so that if you are editing the templates, you have the same kind of affordances you have on desktop. And because everything's running in the browser and they have super tuned hot reloading, you get really fast iteration cycle. And best of all, if you build something you really like, you can download the project, install the CLI using just npm install, and you can continue working on the application within the environment of the Angular CLI. So far, we talked a lot about Angular and tooling for Angular. But I know that many of you are still using AngularJS. There's a lot of AngularJS code. And actually, at Google, even though most of the active development is in Angular, just recently, I think a week ago, we reached a threshold where now we have at Google more Angular code than AngularJS code. We know that the situation is similar externally. And this is why we worked with Alana Olson over the summer to build a tool called Migration Assistant. Migration Assistant allows you to scan your AngularJS project, get some statistics about the project's size and complexity. It will inform you about any kind of prep work you should do before you start your migration, and then will suggest the best migration course for your application depending on its size and complexity. Elena is actually here, and she'll do a talk on this tomorrow. So if you're interested in upgrading from AngularJS to Angular, check out her talk. And there are also two other great talks on this subject. I think one of them is today by Sam, and there is one by Aaron, so check them out. As I mentioned, Angular now is the framework, tooling, and material in the CDK, the Component Development Kit. Angular Material is our implementation of the material design spec. That is a visual spec that was created by designers at Google that Angular implements. This is a suite of components that you can use to build an application. This year, we refreshed the entire suite to be compatible with the latest updates to the spec. There is a Material Design 2.0 spec, and Angular Material now fully supports that. So if you update to the latest version, your application will have a more modern look. Component Development Kit is a look and feel agnostic set of libraries, utilities, and components that allow you to build other components much more rapidly. This includes things like accessibility, layout, overlays, and stuff like that. We also provide generic components like tables and trees that are often very difficult to build. This year, we added two major things to the CDK. One of them is drag and drop, and the other one is virtual scrolling. I see many people getting excited about this. Drag and drop makes it very easy for you to build an application where you can very visually reorder items within a list, or have two lists and drag and drop things between two lists with very little code. Virtual scrolling is all about how do we deal with the problem of listing large sets of data that don't fit in the memory of mobile devices or even on desktop in a way where we can still have scroll bars that feel natural and native. With virtual scrolling, you can achieve this kind of user experience with very little code. And again, because it's not styled in any way, you can customize it. The whole idea of CDK is to allow you to build other kind of look and feel components on top of the CDK. And this is what the guys from Nebula did when they built their suite of components. So if you are a company that has a very specific design specification, you can use CDK to build your own set of components. Once you have a lot of components and you're building applications quite rapidly, one of the problems that we see developers face is their interactions with designers. This is why earlier this year, we created a new effort called Angular for Designers. And as part of this effort, we worked with a team from Google Cloud that was interested in creating a tool for prototyping that would use real components that the engineers use to build a real UI. This tool is called CoDesign. It's still being built, but we started talking about it externally, and the team is planning to open source it and make it available next year. With this tool, because you're using real components, you are able to create prototypes that look much more like the final product. You're able to iterate much faster, and if the underlying components change in production because we add new features or change the look and feel, it's much easier to update the prototypes because there is no code duplication. I'm really excited to see how designers start using this kind of tool in the future. So we talked about Angular in the past. We talked about Angular in the present. There is a lot of stuff happening in the future and the things that we are planning. I don't really feel very confident talking about when things will be ready or what exactly will the outcome look like. But what I know is that we are always striving to make building applications easier, simpler, and make developers much more productive in building very rich user interfaces. This is why we are working on two main efforts for the future of Angular. The first one is expanding the use cases for Angular through Angular Elements and Ivy Renderer. In the past, the thing that made Angular the choice for many of you here is that we focused on applications, on building often enterprise applications with a lot of affordances for scale and for contributions from a large team of developers. However, With this approach, we are missing out on some of the use cases, especially the simpler ones where you want to build a component that you want to reuse in many websites and many different applications that might not necessarily be Angular, or you want to build static websites with Angular. For this to work really well, we need Angular to be much more lightweight than what it is today. We were able to get decent results with things like Angular Universal that allows you to do server-side rendering, and many of the optimizations that we have in our build pipeline. But for some use cases, we really need a very lightweight core, and this is what Angular Elements and Ivy Renderer is all about. Angular Elements is a way to take an Angular component, wrap it into a custom element, and then make it possible to drop this into any application or any website. This approach is very standards-based. It uses custom element spec and other specs from the web component umbrella of specs. These components are self-bootstrapping, which means that once you package them and load them into your application, as soon as you add the HTML tag into DOM, the component will just pop up and bootstrap. This makes it very easy to lazy load things and sprinkle Angular components throughout an application. It works everywhere. You can use this approach to share components not only in Angular applications that were not built by your team, but also in static websites. And lastly, it's available now. This is something that we already released for certain use cases. And with the Ivy renderer, we are going to make it even more feasible to use Angular elements in many different scenarios. I was happy to see 4 days ago, I think, when the SharePoint team announced that they are now supporting Angular elements as a way to bring Angular components to the SharePoint portal. So if you are a SharePoint developer, check out this announcement, because using Angular with SharePoint just became much easier. I mentioned Ivy Render or Project Ivy several times, and many of you probably heard about it. What Ivy is a total rethink of how the rendering and compilation pipeline in Angular should work. With Ivy, we have focused on creating smaller applications when it comes to payload size by reducing both the generated code and also the runtime itself, and also making the runtime more tree-shakeable, more code-splittable, so that if you're using only a few features of Angular, you don't get to pay for all of them. Additionally, we also focus quite a bit on faster compilation, because one thing that we see, especially outside of Google, where we have a different build setup, as the applications grow, big enterprises and big teams often face a problem of long compilation times. With Ivy, we rethought how the compilation works, and with Ivy, the compilation is fully incremental, which means that if you have a big project and make only small changes to it, the time it takes to recompile is proportional to the change, not to the size of your overall application. This will make the rebuilds much faster and hopefully developers much happier. The last thing I want to highlight is that simple debugging. This is because the code that is generated with Ivy is much simpler and is human readable. You can place breakpoints into it, and we even have a source map integration that allows you to put the breakpoints directly from your templates. We're going to have 2 talks on Ivy. They're going to happen tomorrow. Alex is going to do a talk on the compiler and how the compiler works. And then Jason from my team is also going to do a talk on the runtime and new possibilities of how you can use Ivy and what kind of new use cases you can use. So please check out those talks. But the thing that makes all of this possible is a focus on size. In the past, when you try to build a Hello World application and you use the most advanced compiler flags and you use Clojure compiler and jump through lots of hoops, the best you could get to was about 36K, which is not bad, but it takes a lot of effort to get here. And this is just Hello World. We need to do much better if we want to be able to just create simple web components and drop them on websites. This is why we set this audacious goal of reaching at least 10K when it comes to Hello World application. I'm happy to report that we actually made it possible to make it even smaller. Through lots of iterations, the payload size for Hello World is somewhere around 7K these days. And once you compress this, it comes down to about 2.7K. With this, This kind of payload size really opens up new possibilities of how you can use Angular, because you can create elements that are completely self-composed. They contain the runtime, and you can just have a simple script tag that you drop into WordPress, any kind of CMS you have, and things just work, and they are built with Angular. The reason why this project is one of the most challenging projects that we've undertaken so far is the backwards compatibility. When I stood on the stage of NGBE in Belgium and talked about how we want to evolve Angular, I made a promise that anything we do in Angular will be backwards compatible and will have an evolution path for any kind of breaking changes that are often necessary. This is why in Ivy, we are striving to make Ivy completely backwards compatible with the current render for all of the common use cases. I'm sure there will be some corner cases where things will not work out, and we'll document these and try to automate things. But for most applications, they should work. And the reason why this is important to us personally is because at Google, we are responsible for upgrading all of the applications at Google. This includes the Firebase and the Google Cloud, massive projects. If we make breaking changes, it's very painful for us to go to these applications that we don't really know and update them. This will make it easier for you to update to Ivy as well. So currently, we are already quite far in this project. We have the full runtime implemented, we have the compiler implemented, and about 2 weeks ago, we kicked off an effort to start validating Angular in Google. This is by bringing the latest version of Ivy into Google and testing against real applications. Through this, we are learning about things that work, that don't. We discover bugs that we need to fix. And as we make progress and get more of the applications working with Ivy, we'll be ready to share Ivy as a labs project with you. And once we are fully confident that everything's working, we'll release it. In this labs project that I mentioned, one of the things we want to do is expose new APIs that are specific to Ivy. Because I mentioned that Ivy enables new use cases, and for these new use cases, we want to provide new APIs that are more ergonomic for them. So once we are ready, we'll share these APIs with you through labs, and we'll welcome any kind of feedback on how these APIs work, and once we are confident and these APIs are mature, we'll release them as a stable version. The second effort for our future is improving the way people build applications. At Google, we use this system called Basil. Basil is used for building all the projects at Google, and now we also use it to build the Angular project on GitHub. It's a system that is designed for scale, where it doesn't matter how much code you have in your application or how many developers are working on it. This is a build system that can handle it. It's a system that is designed for speed, that is gained through parallelism. It takes advantage of any kind of CPU cores that are available in your machine, and can also offload build tasks to cloud. So if you have a large projects, you can actually benefit from remote execution, where parts of your build execute in the cloud on 50, 100, several hundred machines. This is how we build stuff at Google. And lastly, it's a system that is multi-language. So often when we deal with enterprises and help our enterprise customers, we see that they're not working with just Angular. They're not working with just TypeScript. They have other parts of their system that are built in different languages. Often it's Java, sometimes it's C++, there might be .NET and other languages. Basil is language agnostic and allows you to build all of these projects together and make sure that they work together. Basil is currently in Angular Labs. That means it's not fully stable. We are still iterating on it. But if you are a company that is interested in getting benefits of scale and speed and are struggling with the current tooling today, we have an early access program. If you're interested in this, please reach out to me here at the conference or tweet at me on Twitter, and I'll put you in touch with the right people. In the future, we would like to make Basil optional in our CLI. That means if you start working on a CLI application and choose to use Basil, you will be able to add Basil to your application, and this will replace the current build system with Basil-based one. This will make it very easy for you to get started and try Basil. I expect that this will actually come out very shortly. We covered quite a lot of ground. We talked about the past of Angular. We talked about things that happened recently in this year. And I gave you some hints about where Angular is going. I would like you to stay in touch with us and follow any kind of progress that we're making. We often tweet at Angular, so please subscribe and follow us. And many of the interesting talks from conferences we publish on YouTube, so please subscribe. With that, thank you very much for coming to this conference. Again, this is a very special event. Please take advantage of connecting with other developers, with speakers. It's a unique opportunity that you won't have when you just interact with people online. And if you have any questions, just come and say hi. Thank you. Bye.